Hey, welcome to another episode of Create or Die. This is your host, Ike Allred. It's another late one. Here it is, after midnight. I got home from my day job, a little sleepy. The wife recommended I take a nap. I did that. Next thing you know, the day is almost over and the week's quickly getting away from us. Here it is, technically Friday early morning, and I still haven't released this week's podcast. So we need to get back on track. But I've done a little bit of planning for this podcast, so it's not going to be, one of those where we just throw caution to the wind and hope things work out. We got somewhat of a plan here. Got something I think might be valuable. Essentially, we're going to talk about the design process, best practices, things that I've witnessed, observed, learned on the job, in school to some degree, and maybe they'll help you out. I've, in talking to some of my listeners, they've expressed a desire that I expound on these things a bit more and share my experience. And that's all we can do, because in the end, all this stuff is subjective. There are rules and best practices, hence the name of this episode. But in the end, once you know the rules, you can break the rules, right? And we don't break them just to break them. We break them to better communicate what it is we're looking to do. If you're writing a novel, there's certain best practices in grammar and structure and sophistication and all that good stuff. But I've heard of several novels over the years where they intentionally write it from the perspective of someone who isn't super literate, and they misspell words or use broken English or whatever, and they win all kinds of awards and what have you. So same thing with design. Here I am getting ahead of it, and haven't even teased the intro yet. So if this is something you're interested in and you think that you could use some direction in this department, or you feel like you've got it all figured out and you just want to hear what I have to say, then go on this little journey with me. Stay tuned, and let's go ahead and do this. So, before I jump into the meat of the episode, just want to do a little catching up. Here we are, episode 47. Been doing this consistently for 47 weeks. We're just 5 weeks away from the year mark. That's ridiculous. I can't believe it. I can't believe it's August 25th. We're talking late August. Late summer, kids are back in school. It's crazy, and it's been a trying week for me. It's been a roller coaster. There's been some ups and downs, and it's helped me to kind of rethink. What am I doing? Am I doing this podcast just because I wrapped my truck and once you start something, you gotta see it through? Or am I doing this podcast because it brings value to me and my listeners? Or am I doing this podcast because I think it's really gonna take off one day and have millions and millions of subscribers and call me Joe Rogan too, right? And Spotify will pick us up all exclusive and we'll live happily ever after, right? Those are the kind of questions that cross my mind. And then I weigh those out with other things I'm doing. I got my day job. I'm grateful for it. And, that's primarily what pays the bills, literally. And then I've got my family. I've got my wonderful, awesome, beautiful wife who, these types of side hustles or pursuits potentially take away from time from her and my family in general. And so you got to make sure that it's worth it. And I will tell you, as much as I love doing this podcast, as much as I love, building and creating this Create or Die brand, in the end, my wife, my family, they come first, and so if it ever gets to a point where this is taking up too much time, or it's shifted to be too much about me and my success just for success sake, then it's not worth the cost. But if I can really give back, if it provides value to you, the listener, if it helps to inspire my children to go after their dreams and grab onto that entrepreneurial spirit to blaze trails, then I'm in a good place, and I'll keep doing it. So I don't know why I bring that up, because thankfully we're in a place where after what's been a roller coaster week, I think I've found some balance again, and haven't had to make that hard decision of do we keep doing this or not. I want to do it, and I believe that that is why 99.9% of these podcasts or content producing ventures fail, or any business in general, is because people don't have the patience to see it through. And here we're coming up on our year mark. That's a big number, but if you listen to several other creators out there, they'll tell you that, hey, I was talking to nobody for the first year, 2 years, or Gary Vee says 4 years for his wine YouTube channel or podcast or whatever it is, and then eventually the right people saw it, heard it, shared it. And so if you want to keep this going, let me know. Drop me a note in the old comments on the YouTube or wherever you find this podcast. So, apologize for getting a little down into the weeds, if you will. But I thought it was important to let you know what's going on with me. So let's get into it, shall we? This is about creating. And sure, there's real world stuff that happens that prevent all of us from creating. And I just shared a little bit about what I run up against. And I know that you all have similar things you're juggling, and probably even heavier things. So as was mentioned at the onset of this episode, talking about design, specifically graphic design, whether it be digital or print, just the general graphic design realm, but it certainly applies to other disciplines, be it interior design, architectural design, industrial design, whatever, motion design. So we're going to be all over the place, but hopefully we'll be able to pull together something that's coherent and that you, my listeners and viewers, consumers of this content, will find value in. And please, for the love of all that's holy, I'm not coming to you as Mr. Expert on top of the soapbox telling you that I got it all figured out, because I don't, and I fall into my traps, little phone it in traps that I've talked about before, where I've created a social graphic, social ad, whatever, for this brand, and so when I'm asked to do another one, it's just like, okay, beep boop beep boop, let's use what we did in the past, swap out the background image and the text, and call it good. Sometimes that's what it calls for, and you just got to do it. But I didn't get into this to just update designs or whatever. I want to continue to push the boundaries, find the edges of the brand for the company I work for as a day job, as well as clients I consult with or for, whatever makes sense there. And I want to constantly be delivering the best I can do. And so how do we ensure that we stay on track? If you're just relying on your ability to just pull something out of your butt or your brain, whatever, and throw it up there on the screen in hopes that it will apply to the customer and resonate with the audience, then chances are it's not going to be as strong as it could be. So here's the design process that I recommend. And I did a little bit of little research, leveraged some online tools to kind of help validate this list. So this isn't just me speaking here. We got a collection of the internet's knowledge in general on this one. So step one of the design process is research and understanding. Okay. Now, why is that important? Well, you got to identify the problem. You got to know what the problem is so we can solve it, right? And you got to do some research, some market research, and requirement gathering. So if this is something that you're doing for a client or your employer, you got to know what it is that success looks like. What are they looking to accomplish? What are the problems that they're trying to solve? Again, identifying the problem. And then the last part of that first step, research and understanding, is stakeholder interviews. So, speak with the clients, the users, the stakeholders, understand their needs, limitations. If we're talking graphic design here and we're creating, a printed piece, what's their budget? Do they want this to be something that the intended audience, looks at and maybe scans through and tosses, or do they want to really delight them with this trifold and use high quality paper with special printing effects like foil, embossing, spot UV or whatever. It's good to kind of understand that. And is it, this is part of that research and understanding is, does it help reinforce the brand? So if you're creating something for a company that is all about renewables and recycling and being environmentally conscious, and then you go and use paper that is not recycled and you're using all of these chemicals in your process, and you're a little too spendy and frivolous with the materials you use, then that's going to come across as tone deaf and that you don't really understand your audience. So in that case, you'd want to create things that are obviously recycled and feel organic and earthy and friendly, and so you would do your research and look at what your competitors are doing. And that doesn't mean, as MX, I'm going to go to our direct competitors and see what they're doing necessarily, but I might get on Pinterest or Behance or Google image search or whatever and start to search for examples of, in this case, trifold designs that are for these types of companies, these environmentally conscious companies. So there you go, step number 1. Now, step number 2, a little something I like to call ideation and conceptualization. Yeah, you can tell I leveraged ChatGPT to help this sound better, but that's beside the point. Ideation and conceptualization. You got to brainstorm, you got to produce mood boards, concepts, wireframes, whatever you got to do to get those initial ideas captured. You want to communicate as quickly as possible to the stakeholders and help them to understand, we did our research. We understand what it is you want us to do. Here is a straw man version, a wireframe, whatever you want to call it, for you to be able to look at and say, yes, we like the layout, you captured all of our notes, please proceed, right? Or even more importantly, you're able to catch things early, like, oh, this is a trifold, but actually I wanted it to be a bifold, or it's a one pager, and we're going to have all this content, on two sides of a 8.5 by 11, and sorry, I was using the term trifold thinking that was just another name for a brochure or whatever, or a printed piece. So it's important to get that understood quickly, because if you've spent all the time doing finished design and InDesign or whatever program you're working in, and then they're asking for changes, it's likely going to take a little longer than if it were a quick sketch or a whiteboard drawing and you've communicated right there on site with your employer or your client, and they're like, yes, that's what we want. Take some pictures of that whiteboard and get to work, right? Or if you're working remotely, which happens a lot these days, is you've gone into your app of choice, or you've drawn this out on a piece of paper and you take some photos and send that on over and get approval. So that's that ideation and conceptualization. So that's obviously part of it, is to understand the framework, the layout with the wireframes, but also if you've if you're creating mood boards, a lot of times you're able to pull images from Google Images, Pinterest, those different resources, different font treatments, paper textures, colors, whatever, pull them all together into, an 8.5 or 1920 by 1080 if you're working digital, slide or two that you call mood boards, and maybe you're doing 2 or 3 different options if that's part of the scope of the project. And then that coupled with that wireframe allows the stakeholder, the client, to look at that and say, yes, nailed the layout, that's great. Out of these 3 mood boards, I'm really digging number 2. Let's go with that. But I liked from number 1, I liked the color palette. So could we kind of go with that vibe that we're seeing in number 2, but pull in the color palette from number 1? And then as a designer, we're in an amazing place at that point. We can get going. But depending on the type of design you do, there still might be a little bit of planning that needs to be done, right? So you've validated your ideas in that ideation conceptualization phase, and then it's down to planning. How are we going to execute this? Okay, we've got the green light. What kind of prioritization do we need to do? Is there storyboarding or flow charting that's necessary? Resource allocation. Which team member has the skills or the bandwidth to tackle this project? And then, based on all of that, can we communicate to the client or employer like, hey, this is when we can deliver that first finished cut of this design? And if you're just working by yourself, and you can skip this step because you've already done that. But we're being thorough here. This is a show, a program that likes to dot all its I's and cross all its T's, if you will. So the next steps, is probably pretty self-explanatory, and that's the design and development. So obviously when we're talking a printed piece, there's no programming, coding development, but you're developing a prototype, or you're actually sending this, whatever. No, I'm trying to make it work for this graphic design example. So we'll use that prototype example. So, you get down into your app, you take your wireframe, you take your mood board that was approved, and you get all the content onto the screen. Let's stick with this trifold example. Lots of different apps you could use, because it's not like a multi-page document. It's essentially just 2 pages, kind of the front of the trifold, the three pieces of the trifold, and then the back or the inside. So you've got 2 pages. Illustrator would probably be my go-to. I've created trifolds in InDesign, but sometimes feels like overkill. Sometimes the client has a preference, so that's a good thing in one of the previous stages to identify. Or you could even use Figma or Photoshop. Pretty much anything these days. They're all capable. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. But for this example, if you want my 2 cents, I would lean towards Illustrator. Okay, and so you take your wireframe, you take your mood board, get all the content onto the pages, throw in the blocks of background colors. I like to have my big background shapes or colors or images on one layer that I can lock, and then on another layer I'll have all my content, the text and icons, maybe smaller images that overlay big background elements, and then that way, you're not accidentally moving the background elements while you're trying to nudge text around and get things all lined up. So that is the design and development phase. Essentially, you get that initial finished concept dialed in, you send it to your stakeholders, be it client or employer or whatever, for review. As part of your scoping process, you may have multiple iterations. I would recommend you at least have one, because it's pretty rare that you're gonna nail it on the first pass, and you're gonna make your employer or client mad if you're like, sorry, that's what you get, we're not making any changes. So definitely part of that design development phase is iterating and getting it where they want it to be. And just to kind of close the loop on that, the development piece is, let's say we're doing a trifold and you want to create a prototype. Well, this isn't like a mobile app where you're building a working prototype that you can view on your phone and click through. Instead, you're printing this out, on your laser printer or whatever, and cutting it. And if it doesn't print on both sides, you're gluing the two pieces together, folding it up maybe, or you take it to a Kinko's or an Alpha Graphics or someone who can produce a single prototype quickly and affordably, and you get it into the hands of the user, the stakeholder, the client, to be like, okay, yeah, this text is readable at this size. The size of the trifold feels right, because surprise, surprise, there are lots of different sizes. You can have a real tiny little trifold that goes inside of a little tiny case for a packaged product, or you could have a bigger 11 by 17 page that's folded up, and you've got a decent size trifold that feels big in someone's hands. There's lots of options there. So that's what I found. If something's going to be printed, you better print that out yourself. And I've made that mistake more times than I can count, unfortunately, where it's like, yeah, this looks decent on the screen, I'm sure it'll probably be all right, I'll just send it off. And then the client prints one or two, or prints the whole batch and decides that, hey, this text is too small, we need to change it. And that's kind of a black eye on you as the designer, for sure. So you want to test those things and get sign off from them, the stakeholders, the project owner, requester, whatever. So that takes us into the testing, essentially, which is the next step. Here I kind of blended them together. You've created that prototype in the design phase, but you're collecting this information on whether the font size is correct or it feels good in the hand of the user or whatever. And obviously, if you're doing something digital like an app, or maybe a different hero image for your homepage, you might employ things like A/B testing. Or not that can't be done with printing either. Here I am, look, this is real. This is on the fly. You could print out 2 or 3 concepts of the trifold at different sizes and share that with the stakeholder, and that's a lot of times a good way to do things, because then they feel involved in the process, like they really have a say and they can tell you, yeah, I really like this larger format. Text is clear. My audience is older, and we can't be having them trying to squint and read this thing or whatever. So, testing. Final step of the design process, according to Ike, is deployment and delivery. And then there's a bonus step, so it's not the final step. Sorry. You would think deployment and delivery is it, and that's why I said that, but it's not. So, deployment and delivery. So what does that mean? So, you've delivered the print-ready files for this, trifold in this example we've been doing, and the client or whatever, they may have the relationship with the printer and they send it in, or they're uploading it to an online tool. They're able to see a preview like, yeah, this checks out. This is what I was envisioning. And you get that approval from the client, and then it gets produced. It's being printed. Then you get it out there into the world. You take that trifold to that trade show that you're going to, and then it's done. It's off. It's launched, right? So you'd say, okay, we're good. We're done. Let's call it good. On to the next project, right? And unfortunately, too many of us, myself included, want to call that the final step. But if you really want to knock it out of the park, you employ the final step, which is the post-launch, right? So that might be monitoring. So if it's a trifold, for example, you ask your client or whoever to be like, pay attention to when you're at this event, how many trifolds are being picked up and kept. Does it create, is it a good conversation starter? Does it captivate the user, for lack of a better term? Was it something that no one went for? What are the learnings we can get from that? And then you have a post-mortem or an after-action review. Sounds a little more optimistic, right? Where you talk about with the client, like, okay, so how did it go? Did it perform well? Did we print too many? Not enough? Was it well received? Were there questions that weren't answered? And so forth. And then that instills confidence in your employer, client, stakeholders, peers, whoever, to be like, hey, I want to work with this person again, because this isn't just a project where they are taking orders and they do it and they wipe their hands of it and never think about it again. They're genuinely curious, like, what are the learnings I can get from this? And how can we do better next time? Which implies that there's going to be a next time. And who doesn't want a next time? If you're if you're a freelancer, business owner, whatever, you got to keep that new work coming through the door. So there you go. That is the design process in a nutshell. So let's just recap real quick, okay? Because we threw those at you, in kind of a long-winded format there. So I'm going to recap. Design process. Step 1, research and understanding. Step 2, ideation and conceptualization. All right. Step 3, planning. Step 4, design and development. Step 5, testing. Step 6, that you would think is the last one, deployment and delivery, but it's not the last one. If you're going the extra mile, you want to employ step 7, which is the post-launch. All right, so there it is, design process. Let me know, is that helpful? Do you agree? Is there something I left out? Would you like me to do this episode again, but from a point of view of a digital project like an app or a website? Let me know. So now on to design best practices in general. So there's going to be a little overlap, but really it's a deep dive into some of these steps in the process that we just talked about. So, this is in no particular order per se, and I did leverage ChatGPT once again to kind of help me gather my thoughts here and consolidate things. So if you got a problem with it, blame ChatGPT, right? And you might be thinking, why in the hell am I listening to this episode if you're just generating this crap with AI? And that's a good question. But it's not, because I'll tell you why. As a designer, a professional, whatever, I could sit there and hammer this list out myself and likely miss a lot of things. Or I can kind of have a general idea in my head of what I would think and then validate those ideas by saying, hey, ChatGPT, Mr. Computer, can do things 1 billion times faster than me. I'm curious what you would list for best design practices, right? And then you compare, and you're like, yeah, I agree, or wow, I totally forgot about that. I would have skipped it, or I don't agree with that, and then 86 it. That's cool too. So that's essentially the process here. But what else is I'm going to, provide a little color commentary on what's being provided here. So design best practices. The first category here is around basic principles. So again, there are basic design principles like alignment. That was one of the first things I remember learning is when in doubt, just, use your guides or whatever and ensure that things are lining up to other things. And is it creating hierarchy with the alignment? Ensure the text and images and shapes are aligned, which helps create a cleaner, more organized design. Now, you may want to, because of the audience or the brand, you don't want clean and organized. You want chaotic and edgy and grungy, for some snowboard brand or whatever. Then because that the best practice is alignment, like if you're following the rules, you're gonna do that. But guess what? Snowboarders, they like to go outside of the lines, they're getting edgy with it, and so you want to not line things up potentially. So just a quick little example there. Another basic principle is contrast. Using contrasting colors, shapes, and sizes helps emphasize the important elements and create a hierarchy. So important when you're communicating. You want to be able to help guide the user's eye down to, the final kind of call to action, which we'll talk about later. And you can do that with contrast. Repetition, repeat certain elements like colors, fonts, or shapes to create a cohesive look. So, it cracks me up, and one of the telltale signs of someone who maybe doesn't know what they're doing is they'll just pull out every font that they can find. They're using Google Docs or Canva, and they're like, wow, I've got 20 font options here. I'm going to use this font for this headline and this font for this body of text. I'm going to use this color here, and we're just going to create a rainbow of awesomeness in their mind. But no, you want to stick to, and we'll talk more about this in the typography section, but stick to 2 to 3 fonts in most cases, and you're repeating those things. Like there's a title that it is being repeated, like in the web world, there's H1s, H2s, etc. You want all of your H1s to be consistent size and weight and font and everything. Or if you're creating icons or you're using certain type of imagery, you want to make sure you might use 2 or 3 different styles, but make sure it's repeated enough throughout the piece so that it feels intentional. It's not like, okay, they use this real kind of flowy S-curve, different line weights in this icon here on panel 1 of the trifold, but here on panel 3 they're using these monoline icons, and then panel 5 they're using these real heavy filled icons, and you're all over the place because someone just happened to find an icon that they felt visually described what it is that they're looking to communicate, but it was from a completely different icon collection. So that's part of it as well, is you got to be able to, you may start with an icon stock file where there's 20 different icons, but then you're like, hey, I need this additional icon, it's not here. Okay, maybe I found what I want in this other style, and you've got to be able to use the tool, use Illustrator or whatever, to create a new icon yourself from that'll fit in the same same batch of icons. So I went a little long on that one, but that's one, that repetition, consistency, super important. Now this is one that I just intuitively do, but don't necessarily think about it. And so this is where ChatGPT is keeping me honest here, and this is called proximity. And basically what that is related items should be grouped together for easier comprehension. Because in the end, design is all about communication. If you're not communicating clearly, what it is that needs to happen, you're not solving that problem that this trifold is, supposed to solve, then you've failed. It can be super beautiful or use the latest in printing technologies, but if it's not communicating, then you've failed. So proximity is a way to do that, and so if you're, for example, you have a title and a bunch of bullets underneath that, you don't want to spread those bullets way out to where it almost, you forget that they're related or they fall under that title. You want to group them in a way where you can visually see that, okay, this is all one section. So proximity, important stuff. And there's a million other examples that could help illustrate that, but that's what I'm going with. Balance. You maintain a sense of equilibrium between different elements to create visual stability. And again, this is another one where you can break that rule if it helps communicate better, or it resonates with your audience that much better. So if something's balanced and creates that stability, then that's good for like a financial company, because you don't want your financial company to be edgy and unsure and kind of on a shaky foundation. If you're putting your money there, you're going to trust them with that. You want to know that they're going to be here tomorrow. When you're ready to cash in, take that money out, whatever, transfer it, you want to know that it's going to be there. And so by creating balance and stability, you're subconsciously relaying those brand promise essentially to your user, your viewer, the consumer. So there you go. That's design principles, which falls under design best practices. Okay, so now let's move on. We got into this a little bit, but typography, font consistency, 2 to 3 fonts helps to maintain a harmonious design. You do more of that, it's going to be unharmonious, which again, you can break that rule, but be careful. It's very rare that I've ever used more than 3 fonts in a single design piece and had it be successful. Legibility, you want to prioritize fonts that are easy to read, especially for the body text. It's fun to see with these computers that we have. Essentially, you can create fonts out of anything. They can get super abstract, and you've got these free fonts that are being created all the time that are fun. But if you try to use that for your body copy and you expect someone to comfortably read paragraph after paragraph of that, or even a couple sentences, then you're up a paddle without a stream, or up a stream without a paddle. Just kidding. That was an intentional mistake there. So yeah, you want to ensure that it's readable. All right. Next up on the typography front is line spacing and kerning. So, you've got your body copy or whatever, and you've got multiple lines. The space in between each of those lines of text, that's obviously line spacing, right? And kerning is the space in between the individual characters. And, your programs do a decent job. You have it set to auto, it'll do a decent job. But I've found if you change your automatic kerning to optical, it's going to do a better job and help improve that. And then obviously you can go in there and adjust the kerning in between each character manually. When you're talking about sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, that can be too much. So you usually don't have the budget or time to do that. But in titles, or especially on your cover or something, you might spend a little more time really dialing that in. So that's line spacing and kerning. And finally, on the typography front is hierarchy. We talked about hierarchy a little bit in the first step of design principles, but if you use different font sizes, weights, and styles, it helps create that hierarchy visually. So, traditionally, your main title will be bigger, then you might have a subtitle, it's going to be smaller than that, and then your body copy is even smaller, right? Or, something they do in publication design a lot of the times is, let's say you're doing a magazine, that first paragraph that really kind of sums up what the entire article is about might even be bigger body copy or formatted in a different way that gets you to at least read that far, and then they'll break it down into multiple columns at a smaller font size. So if you want to dig in more, you can do that, but you're drawn to that copy up at the top that's bolder and all that good stuff, right? Okay, moving on. We're on to color, okay, and best practices. Color harmony, the use the use of consistent color schemes, based on color theory. And that's something that can be a little tricky. You got your different color theories going on, different rules with complementary colors, analogous colors, triads, whatever. That can get a little confusing, and you can spend a lot of time with the color wheel, and ain't nobody got time for that. Just kidding. There are times where you definitely want to do that, and I recommend learning that, but a little hack, if you will, to good color usage is through inspiration. You may be working on this trifold. We're trying to stick to the same example for this whole episode, right? You might be working on this trifold, but as you were doing your first step, research and pulling together different examples of things, you might have found, website design that you like the colors from that, or maybe you found a few different designs and you decide I'm going to pull 2 or 3 colors from this and 2 or 3 colors from that, which is probably too many colors. You maybe want to stick to maybe 3 or 4 colors total, but you grab those, just straight up steal them. There ain't nothing against stealing a color palette, and leverage that in your design. And if they look good to you, then they're probably good, because again, it's subjective. And a lot of people struggle with how to find maybe different shades of colors. So maybe you've got your core 2 colors, okay? For this example, we'll use blue and purple. Let's say you've got, and these are your flat colors. So you take your purple, and in your hue and saturation HSL color window, duplicate the color, and then take that darkness, increase it a little bit, right? The black, you're adding more black to your purple, and you'll see a little comparison of like, here's the color we started with and here's the new color. All right, great. That's a darker version of that, so you can add some tone variation. Take that same original purple that you started with and drag that slider the other way after you've duplicated it. And then here you are with a lighter purple. So now we've got 3 purples that are all the same hue, essentially. I think I've got that right, but at different values or tones. And again, I apologize. Correct me if it was a little too late at night and I'm mixing up my terminology here, but you get the gist, okay? And you do that with the blues as well. And then you have these 2 colors, and now if you have a lighter version and darker version of both of those, what are we at now, right? We're at like 6 colors. So that'll help you to create something that still feels sophisticated because you're sticking to fairly limited palette, but then you have the ability to play with those values, which can better communicate different sections. A lot of times you'll have the solid purple, but you can call one section out by using a little container around a block of text and use the darker purple as a background and whatever. So definitely color is important. There's even psychology of color. Certain colors convey different things. If you're looking for something that's calm and peaceful, you're not going to use red and black, right? That's really strong, loud, edgy. Calm and peaceful are going to be light blues, whites. Could be different cool colors that work there, and also warm colors. But you got to think about that. And there's also things about how different colors might affect the way your body functions a little bit. Like, I think, you see red and it makes you more hungry or something. Don't quote me on that, but there are definite psychology behind those colors. Accessibility. So this is something that, is important, more important today than ever, as we're more conscious of like ADA compliance and things, where there's actual rules for people that, may be visually impaired in some way, whether it be color blindness or just can't see very well. But it's also, accessibility to anybody, right? Like if you're trying to fit a bunch of text on a page just to fit a bunch of text on a page, but you make it too small where nobody is really able to comfortably read it, then you've made it unaccessible to a large group of people, which is not good. Okay. Moving on here, you got your imagery. Okay, so high quality images, always the way to go. High resolution for clarity. Nothing makes a printed project, or a web project for that matter, feel cheaper, more amateur when you've got images that are pixelated, or obviously, too big. You're loading a web page and you got to watch this image slowly load because someone uploaded some 7,000 by 7,000 pixel image straight from their DSLR camera, right? But it's not just the quality, technical quality of the images, but it's the relevance. Are these images directly related to what it is you're talking about? Are they quality images that were shot well? It's just huge area. Imagery also has to do with iconography and illustration. If you're creating illustrations or diagrams or whatever, are they cohesive? Do they complement one another, or do they feel like they're coming from multiple different sources and feel disjointed? That's not good, right? Okay, let's keep on cranking. Layout and composition. So this is one that kills people. This is so critical, because I'll tell you, you've got a limited amount of space that you're dealing with, whether it's a web page, you're talking about your home page, and you have what's called above the fold. Okay, so that's where maybe you've got a laptop screen. Maybe the majority of people are using MacBook Pros, and you've decided that you're gonna call that your screen size and fold. And so the eager client or stakeholder or whatever says, I want to make sure this is above the fold, that's above the fold, we're going to cram this in here, we're going to get use cases, we're going to get a real catchy title, we're going to get a call to action up in there, and we're just going to make sure that nothing is missed on that initial view of our page. Or in our example of the trifold, I've got one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It's like they're getting ready for a math test where the teacher said you can bring in one page, and so people write in their smallest writing, whatever, they're trying to cram it in. Excuse me. But let me tell you, if you don't make good use of white space, then you're going to do more harm than good. Okay, because in these examples where people are trying to cram too much into the space because everything's important, what they don't realize is if everything's important, then nothing's important, right? If you really want the user to hit that call to action to register, then don't distract them with 3 different use cases and this real detailed image diagram that explains the whole company's business in one detailed diagram, as well as all of these logos of other companies you work with as proof points, because you want to make sure they see it. Then guess what? They're going to open up that page and they're going to be like, whoa, this gives me an uneasy feeling. Let's look at the other option that Google surfaced up when I looked for whatever it is I'm searching for, right? Whether, they know it or not, all of us, humans in general, are sensitive to design and how it makes us feel. Even if you're not a designer, if you look at something, if you like it or not, or if it feels sophisticated or not, or professional or not, or if it feels confident and makes you feel more calm, or it makes you feel uneasy. And so white space is absolutely critical here. So don't be afraid. In fact, it shows a great deal of sophistication to have less is more, right? If we're talking about this website hero section and you've got 3-4 words, bold kind of title, and a simple call to action, and the rest is essentially white space, that doesn't necessarily mean it's just white. It could be a different color or subtle image in the background or whatever, but that makes your website look more sophisticated, makes you look more confident, because I'm so confident that you're going to want to click that register now button that all I have to do is give you this 4-word title, and I know you're going to click it. And then people just click it because they're like, yeah, I'm feeling it. I want to click that thing. So getting real technical super super smooth with my talking here at 1:30 in the morning now. Good gravy. I had a nap, but I do need to get a bed soon, right? But moving on. Grids and guidelines. Use grids to maintain consistency and alignment. So that goes back to what we talked about in the onset. Focal point. Establish a focal point to guide viewers' eyes. So if you, and this is something you can kind of test as well, is like ask somebody, when you first see this, where do you want to look first? Is it over here, top left, and we read, left to right, top down? Or is it because of, employing some of these techniques of contrast and color and white space and everything, I actually go to the other end and I'm drawn to that call to action, and then I have to keep going back, but my eye just is drawn to that call to action. Maybe that's what you want, but you want to have a focal point. Okay, next step, digital design considerations. Considerations. Not considerations. I like that word though. It's not a real word. Responsiveness. Ensure your design adapts well to various screen size, which is obviously, at least currently, just a digital thing, right? We don't really have examples of one physical thing that can morph into different sizes. Different file formats. Make sure you're using the appropriate type. If you need to have transparencies, you want to use PNGs versus JPEGs for photographs. Optimization. Compress those files. We talked about that earlier. If you've got some huge file size that causes your app or your website to perform slowly, then that's going to convey the wrong message to your user, right? User experience in general. So this isn't, a lot of times we think, user experience designer, that's just digital, that's for apps or whatever. No, it's also for print design. Make sure you have that clear CTA or call to action. That's, you're telling your user, your viewer, your consumer what it is you want them to do. Talk about version control here. I knew that didn't feel right. Apologies. Navigation. Ensure that digital designs are easy to navigate, or even if it's not digital, it's physical. You've got this trifold. Is it clear, the flow? Or you open up the cover and the first thing you see should have been on the back side, or you start to talk about one thing and then you get into something else, and really in another panel you pick back up and it's poor navigation of even a physical piece, and that's not good either. And then part of that user experience step is the feedback and iteration. Whether you're working with digital prototypes or physical printed prototypes, getting that feedback from yourself, first and foremost, of like, how does this feel for me? And then your stakeholders and other users. It all depends on the scope of your project and how much time you have. Sorry, my throat's getting dry here. This is quite possibly the longest podcast I've ever done. I'm trying to fit a lot into this one. But final best practices is professional practices, things that you just want to be sure to do that aren't necessarily part of design, but in terms of the actual designing process, but they're kind of those safety checks, like proofreading. Oh my goodness. It's one thing to misspell a word or, forget to add some punctuation to a digital product. But to a printed product, that mistake is like there forever, right? You either have to do a complete reprint, which is expensive or, doesn't work within your time frame, or you just got to live with it, or you try to create some sticker that you can place over your mistake and try to make it look intentional, which, some cases it's the right move, but in most cases will look janky. So proofreading is so important, and you don't want to just rely on yourself for that. Give it to your stakeholders and say, because of the timeline and I'm cranking on all this stuff you've asked me to do, I've done my best to kind of ensure that I'm copying things over correctly and I've scanned through it, but in the end you've got to sign off on this, and it'll be on you if there's a mistake. You're basically telling me that you've thoroughly looked over this, you signed off, you're good to send it to print, and if we miss something, guess what? It's not we, it's you. Okay? It's the hard truth of it all, but you approved it. And it helps, CYA, cover your arse, right? Because you've got your boss or your client saying that, okay, I agree, I approve this message, right? And version control, keeping your files organized. There's long-running graphic design jokes out there where, you'll create these files like trifold 1, trifold 2, trifold 2A, trifold final, trifold final, trifold final, date, officially approved, .pdf or whatever, it gets crazy. So version control's a good thing. Helps you keep things organized, and you can easily find it if you know that you're doing the company name, doing work for Adobe _ this is a trifold _ and here's the 6-digit date _ whatever. Try to keep something consistent, find something that works. I'm actually not very good at this, and so this is a good reminder to me. And then final part of professional practices is client presentation. Prepare to articulate your design choices effectively to clients or stakeholders. And so that's, verbally, like let's say you're presenting it in person, are you able to defend your different decisions? Are you able to say, here's this concept and here's why I chose to do X, Y, and Z. Here's this other concept, and you can see that I've tried this and for this reason or that. And then it also has to do with visually, how are you presenting it? Are these printed out on 8.5 by 11s and you're just quickly throwing these around and wrinkling them up, or are you presenting in front of a big boardroom, and so get them printed on big boards, or ensure that you have the technology to present them on a big screen so everybody can see it at once. Just imagine how horrible it would be. You walk into a room, you've got a stack of 8.5 by 11 designs to share with everybody, but there's only one copy, and you expect people to pass them around or something. It doesn't matter how awesome your design would be, you'd be working from a bad position if you're trying to sell that in that type of scenario. So super important. So there you go. I'm done. That's it. That's my time. That's my list. Again, let's just recap design best practices. You got your basic principles. You got your typography. You got your color. You got your imagery. You got your layout and composition. Digital design considerations, user experience, and professional practices. And let me know. Do you find value in this? Did this get you amped for your next project? Or are you someone who is looking to break into design and this was super helpful and now you feel that much more confident? Let me know. And if it's helpful, as always, appreciate a like, a follow. We need that. And I know you're only supposed to ask for like one thing, and here I'm asking for 3. I apologize, but if I could choose any of them, give me a follow. If you can do one thing, follow this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of them. Appreciate it, my friends. Till next time, keep on creating. Create or die.